All right, welcome to Ivory GC. Today we're joined by Alexis Freeman, General Counsel at Lindblad Expeditions. Alexis has an extensive background in corporate restructuring and now leads the legal function at Lindblad, which specializes in adventure travel and ecotourism. We'll dive into her journey from big law to in-house roles, the unique legal challenges of operating in global tourism, and how the industry has evolved in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Alexis, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So why don't you start with telling us a little bit about Lindblad, your role there, and the industry.
I started at Lindblad in October 2019 when the company was at its highest share price ever and really a growth company doing really incredibly well, and part of why I was brought into the company. I came from the world of restructuring, so distressed companies, and I was so excited to be going to a healthy environment because healthy companies, frankly, are much easier than distressed companies. And less than 6 months later, the world shut down. And actually about 2 months in, because the rumbling started in December, there was this new virus. And we have ships and guests all over the world. And I remember being called into Sven Lindblad, the founder, and at the time CEO, his office with the commercial team saying, we have guests on this ship in Vietnam and it's going to Thailand, and I don't know what we should do.
Yeah.
And it was so new. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah.
in the US, but we have to follow global news. I'm like, nobody,
Yeah.
certainly in that
Yeah.
room. And I can probably speak for the city of New York and the rest of the universe altogether, had any idea what it would become.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating is when you look back in hindsight, is once this went on for a little bit of time, even before March 16th, which was kind of like the day the world shut down, there were conversations in the office about, what do we do? We did obviously not go forward with the rest of the Asian ones at the time. And I was about to close on a new build ship. We had a new, brand new, fabulous state-of-the-art ship that was supposed to close March 9th. The closing was I think it was in Norway. And I was supposed to go to the closing, but people are like not getting home. And like with any closing, there are some delays. And I was thinking, can we maybe close this? Like, we didn't use the word remote then, but can we,
Sure.
close this by phone or by whatever computer?
Yeah.
And as it got closer, I was still a little bit like, well, should I go? And then we did not close the 9th, and people were stuck. Our teams were stuck
Oh my
because
gosh.
it was a new ship build. So we had people that were getting the ship ready, done.
Yeah.
In between these two things, so like in between the closing, but prior to, in the 2 months like leading up to it, our CEO said, I have kind of like a crazy idea. Maybe we should just like shut down the company for a couple months and not take any, financial risk or losses. Like, what, maybe that's an idea. And everyone's like, what? No, what? No. He mentions this to us periodically because remember when everyone thought I was crazy? And I guess that just comes from, this was his baby,
Yeah.
and it was
Yeah.
such an outlandish idea. And it turns out that we very well may have been in the same place, actually,
Yeah.
because sure enough, March 16th, which is the day we closed on the ship, by the way, and I will never forget this because it was a Monday. And that Friday, the Friday prior, I think, was when all the news came out in New York City and probably elsewhere, but this is where I live, about schools are shutting down for at least 2 weeks. And by then I knew, oh, no, this is not going to be 2 weeks, but okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to go into the office because it was the closing. So I had to go get my computer and pick up my stuff. And I had all these signed documents that I had to get done. And it's the National Geographic Endurance is the ship that we were closing on. We are co-branded with National Geographic. So our cruises are known as the National Geographic cruises. That is actually our business.
Got it.
Notwithstanding, we are not National Geographic. It's by virtue of a license agreement. And so I had to go to the Bahamas Maritime Authority because as part of a ship closing, you have to get the vessel flagged. And the woman there had to come in from, I don't know, one of the suburbs. And I came in and we're closing. And there's one document that she says, this document needs to be notarized. Now, there are tumbleweeds in the street of New York City at this point. Truly, there's no one outside.
Yeah.
And I said, this was not one of the required notarized documents. And she said, we can't do this without a notary. And I'm like, oh my God, literally, there's nobody in this town right now.
Yeah.
My husband's a notary. And I called home and I was like, I need you to get in a cab and come notarize something for me. And my kids were young. He's like, the kids are home from school. Like, what do you want me to do? I'm like, put them in the cab. Don't let them call me mommy. I'm like, just tell them, don't call me mommy, because I gotta get this closed today. And I don't want them to challenge the notary. So, that's a very big lead up to, and then our business shut down. Cruise is, as you may recall, the industry that was shut down for the longest of any, because there was all the spread of COVID on big cruise ships. Now our ships are very small. It is not within the same universe. We are not subject to the same regulations. Our largest ship capacity is 156 passengers, as opposed to some that have 5,000-10,000 guests. And we still were not permitted to sail because people weren't booking, people weren't traveling. And aside from all the health regulations that, everyone by now was familiar with in some capacity, when you are a company that sails, it's not just the regulations from where your guests are departing. There are different ones for each country, which proved really challenging too. And so it was 16 months before we were able to actually resume operations.
So what does the company do in that period of time? I mean, looking back on it, it doesn't sound like shutting down would be the worst idea in the world. But I mean, how were you able to survive? I'm sure there was I would think government subsidies available, or maybe not. How did things go during that 16-month period?
Well, there was if you could believe it, we were busier than ever, actually, at least
really?
on the corporate side, side. So the ship operationals teams were obviously not doing as much. A couple of weeks prior to things like shutting down, but we knew something was going on and things were gonna not get better. I took a look at our debt documents. And I knew that there was a chance that with the industry changing, the world changing, that there may be a significant change that would not allow us to draw down on our revolver. So I went to the CFO and I said, I think we should do this now before it's too late. And we did. And so we had extra liquidity that we were able to get easily, simply because the triggers of I don't remember the precise language offhand, but there are terms in the debt documents which are basically like significant change in circumstances in the industry, something along those lines that prevents you from being able to draw down. So we were very fortunate to have taken care of that before it became an issue. For sure, there were a lot of cost reductions that had to be implemented. We definitely had to furlough people, which was not uncommon for anybody. We did bring most back, so that was good at the time when we resumed operations. We were making all kinds of changes as to what things would look like when things resumed, but it was busy. And while the industry, the company certainly took a financial hit like everybody else, I think that there were a lot of really useful changes and lessons learned that better position us going forward. And to specifically respond to your comment about government aid, that was actually a really interesting and painful at times situation too, because there were the PPP loans, which I don't even remember what PPP stands for, which we received. And I don't know if you're familiar with it at all, but that was a government loan that was available to a number of industries, including travel. And some companies came under tremendous scrutiny for actually
Right.
taking those funds,
Right.
even though pursuant to the rules, they were qualified. And it's something that we discussed, and we did not want to have any reputational issues, even though we definitively
Yeah.
qualified. But there
Yeah.
was a ton of scrutiny, and a lot of CEOs, a lot of companies were really like dragged through the mud about it. And so
Yeah.
ultimately, we shifted gears, and there were some other limited opportunities for smaller travel companies. So we were able to access that. Frankly, those amounts were not particularly big. They were pretty small.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the operational aspect of Lindblad on the corporate side. How many employees do you have? And what was your legal team look like? Things like that.
The legal team is me. You're looking
Yeah.
at it. Aside from external, I have a very um, robust might sound more than it is, but at all times, I am regularly engaged with outside counsel for a variety of
Yeah.
things. I have,
Yeah.
outside counsel that I consult with regularly on SEC issues. I do the SEC stuff, but I would never hold myself as like the SEC expert.
Sure.
But internally, it is in fact just me for
Yeah.
all things. Um, so I don't actually know the divide for onshore versus shipboard employees. I should probably know this. But overall, it's about 1,300 employees, and Lindblad is the parent company.
Hmm.
So we are the parent company, and our business is really the cruise industry. We also own 5 land-based travel companies. So those are Natural Habitat
Okay.
Adventures. NatHab is partnered with World Wildlife Fund. So they are like up close and personal in the adventure travel land-based world. We own Duvine Cycling, which is a biking tour company. We own Off the Beaten Path, which primarily they do all kinds of land tours, but they primarily do national parks, and Classic Journeys, which is a walking tour company, and Thompson Safaris, which, as you may expect, is an African safari company. And NatHab is the only entity that had been owned by Lindblad before I joined. So I did the acquisitions of all the other companies, and now they are part of our
Okay.
Lindblad family, for whom I also perform legal services.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And so, do you have M&A? Did you have M&A experience? We'll talk about some of your background before joining Lindblad, but did you do much M&A before joining the company?
Some, I would certainly not say it was, my forte or most of what I did, but I was a financial restructuring lawyer. So I did a lot of I did all of my work in the restructuring department, which was both in court and out of court restructuring. So invariably, you have restructurings that have M&A
Yeah.
components of them. So
Yeah.
certainly I
Yeah.
did them. In fact, one of my favorite things in that practice was doing what's known as 363 sales. They are sales in a bankruptcy case, and that was my favorite thing, and probably the most akin to an M&A. But I had been
Yeah.
involved in other things, not to the extent that I've been involved in them since I joined Lindblad.
Got it. And so, legal kind of touches companies in different ways, and what's required of legal, I should say, is different from company to company. What are you spending most of your time doing? What are some of the primary legal challenges or obstacles or just tasks that you're facing on a day-to-day basis?
Every day is different, I will tell you that. There is nothing that I don't touch, and I don't mean just from a legal perspective. I spend at least 50% of my time working with HR. There are a
Yeah.
lot of employee issues. By employee issues, I don't mean like issues among employees, for example, but we are a public company. So, right now there's a lot of stuff that I've been doing. Like yesterday, I spent my entire day working on our annual shareholder proxy, which is coming due to be filed soon.
Hmm.
And bonuses were paid recently. Bonuses are, depending on the employee, have a large stock component. So the stock issuance piece, which then requires SEC filings and making sure it all ties together for our proxy, that is like a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
Quarterly, of course, I have to do all the SEC earnings, that kind of thing. That has
Yeah.
its own
Yeah.
standard cadence. I have not had an M&A since January, so it's been a little bit slow on that. But when we are really in an M&A, that takes up a very big part of my not just day, but days, months. And I did 2 acquisitions actually last year. So the safari company I mentioned, we closed on over the summer. I think it was June. I used to know every single date. I think it was June. And then we bought, it actually is a Costa Rican entity that we acquired, but the purpose for the acquisition was to buy 2 vessels from Celebrity Cruises, which is a Royal Caribbean entity, subsidiary. And just the way that the foreign rules work, we had to buy the holding company in Costa Rica to get to the vessels, because they're Ecuadorian vessels and there are foreign ownership rules about how these things happen. And that I closed in January. So, other things that are kind of like pressing right now is we travel all over the world. So we have tour operator agreements in all different kinds of countries. In fact, 2 hit me today. We have charter agreements where both we charter our ships to private groups, a lot of universities, for example, who do their like alumni programming, and we charter ships from other owners. Those ships are really abroad, like in Egypt, for example, India, for example. So I'm working on those, making sure we have good terms. We actually charter flights too. So one thing that I have today is working with an airline overseas in SAS. I actually can't remember what country they're in, but I think they're in like Norway or Iceland or something. Finland. It might be Finland, whatever. But so those operational things I do regularly. I also do the marine side of things, which is like dry dock. So when our ships have to go into repair, like that's one that I reviewed very shortly before I got on the call with you. So there's not one piece of this business that I don't touch.
Yeah. And how are you finding it, being solo? Where do you find there to be, and you talked about your outside counsel team, where do you feel either stretched for resources or in a place where, you could use some external or internal help?
There's no question that I could use internal help. Absolutely no question. Part of the challenge, I think, is that it's very hard to impose years of education and knowledge. So often it ends up being easier, whatever easier means, for me to do it myself, simply because even though my bandwidth is so low, the efficiency of it for me to do it myself is just much quicker, because, I know the people. When I came in, there was no one that had ever been at my level of seniority in a legal position. So over the last several years, I have really been able to streamline a lot of things, that it has taken the organization to a much more sophisticated, efficient pace, where I can look at things and know what needs to be changed very quickly. I still obviously have to review the whole thing, because who knows what shows up. But stress for resources 100%. I mean, my outside teams are really tremendous, but like we also have a cadence with each other, like where I really need them to, like, I don't know what this is about, help me out here. But then the reality is, next time I need to rely on them less, because, I'm learning every day. And I just think that that's really an important skill for being a lawyer. I was joking with my husband, who's also a lawyer, the other day, and I said, I left big law as a restructuring lawyer, but I could go back as a labor and employment lawyer. I could be an SEC lawyer. I could be a corporate M&A lawyer.
Yeah. One of the benefits of working with outside counsel I've seen is you just learn from them, and then you, like you said, you take more on yourself the next time, and you outsource kind of less and less as you go. What have been some processes or technologies that you've used that have been particularly effective in your day-to-day? Have you implemented anything that's really, really working well over the last few years?
Technology, no.
Yeah.
No. which I think is part just the nature of the company. The company itself has been behind in technology, and that's been a very big undertaking, digital transformation, et cetera.
Sure.
In terms of processes, really, frankly, my own, which
Yeah.
comes from what is truly, in my mind, invaluable experience from having worked in big law. And I worked in big law for so long. I mean, you learn so much about being a diligent, detail-oriented, really accountable person, and picking up on whether it be, language tweaks in a document, or what to look for if you've been on a litigation side, for example, and I was on both. So I did both, to kind of like be able to anticipate what should be in every agreement, or the things that you see from time to time that may not be on the radar of somebody who, for example, has only ever been in-house. And
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
processes that I have done is, earlier on when I was here, I spent time with every department that came to me, and I took time to explain to them why I do certain things, right? I would say there really is a method to my madness. I understand that this is really frustrating and you feel like it's more work, but trust me on this. I
Yeah.
want you to understand why. I want you to be able to go back to your business counterpart and not just say because legal told me, because it's not going to be
Mhm.
effective and it's not going to expedite the process when you come back and say, well, they say we have to. I'm like, no, just because they say we don't have to. And let me explain to you why.
Yeah.
So the process of really taking the time to work with and get, my clients really, to appreciate the benefit of the legal process without just finding it so, frustrating, because
Yeah.
the reality is most business people are just annoyed by legal. They just have determined they're just going to say no without always being receptive to understanding how much better it actually is for their purpose as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Which business counterparts are you finding yourself working with most frequently? Is there a particular team or role within the company that you interact with more so than others?
HR is a daily thing.
Yeah.
Hands
Yeah.
down, HR is a daily thing. Although I work as equally with finance, with by operations, it's sort of twofold. So it's really the marine team, which includes not just, the onboard experience of the ship, et cetera. It's the hotel team, it's the expeditions. The expeditions is really more like I say experience, which probably sounds the same thing as being on board, but the way our operations are, there's the marine team, which is like fuel, where they're actually going to port and dock. They of course do that with the expeditions team, who's coming up with the voyage, but
Yeah.
they are two different teams. And so I work much more with the guest planning, expedition development type operations team, more the marine. But again, like today's a day where I've done it all. And then for
Yeah.
sure, there's a lot of partnership with the sales and marketing teams,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's also the guest interface.
Yeah, got it. And so let's talk a little bit about your background, your legal background. So you mentioned you were in big law. Can you tell us, and you're on the restructuring team, tell us a little bit about that experience, how long you were there, and how that transitioned from a outside counsel role to an in-house counsel role.
So I started my career at a firm that's no longer in existence. It was Bingham McCutcheon, and I started working with the restructuring team. I was there for about 2.5 years, and then I moved to Eaton Gump, where I was there for 15 years, also doing restructuring. Aiken, which is of course the vast majority of my time spent training and working as a lawyer. We did representations of all entities. Primarily when I started, it was creditors committee work. Again, all in restructurings where there are multiple parties. There's the company, there's the creditors, secureds, unsecureds. There's a whole, cast of characters.
Sure.
And the more I did debtor work, which is for the company, the more I enjoyed that and thought, well, this is great, but then we kind of get them to a better place and they move on. And,
Hmm.
I'm sort of invested. I'd like to stay involved. So, um, Aiken didn't know this, of course, but I was looking for a long time and I knew that I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to go in-house, and there were opportunities along the way, actually, with some clients, but geographically they didn't really make sense. Like there was one in Houston, there was one in Nevada. So I just kept looking, and I knew that my restructuring training would really position me well to go in-house, because when you work with a company in distress in a restructuring, the restructuring process, and as a result, the professionals really get jurisdiction over everything. So the restructuring team becomes the primary leader of the representation. And so whereas outside of a restructuring, the whether it be GC or CEO, whoever the person is internally, might call their outside employment counsel for something, or their real estate counsel for something, or insurance. I mean, there's nothing that didn't come our way. It shifts so that it comes through the restructuring world. So as restructuring senior lawyers, when there's an insurance issue, when there's a real estate issue, when there's a labor and employment issue, when there's a litigation, all of it comes within your supervision. So because I had already had so much experience with that, it was more of that I wanted. Then I went out to seek. And I say this, if there are ever any restructuring lawyers listening to this, as a restructuring lawyer, you kind of know that, like, I am an expert in restructuring, obviously, but I'm a generalist. Everyone should want me for this role. Like, there's no one better suited. What's fascinating is that from a recruitment perspective, you ordinarily see recruiters looking for somebody either with plain corporate experience or SEC experience. And I have always found that to be interesting and frankly short-sighted, because anyone can pick up those parts. The rest of understanding how an organization works and how things really tie together and which pieces need to be speaking to the other pieces to have an overall productive and successful result, you don't always see in like such niche practices that don't have the umbrella vision like we do. So this one, if you can believe it, I found just on LinkedIn. It was so random. I had something else that I thought I was going to pursue. And as irony would have it, that company that I had spoken to and I had an offer, as I was negotiating their offer, I got an email. You can't even make this stuff up. I was sitting at my desk in the firm, and I got an email from one of the partners I work with saying, hey, we might be retained by so-and-so in this company's restructuring. And I was like,
oh my gosh, the company that you had an offer from.
Yes.
And
when you're in restructuring, there are watch lists all the time. It's uncommon that you don't have a company on your radar. This one wasn't. And I was like,
wow. Yeah.
What's happening? That company liquidated and is no longer in existence. It was the craziest, like, I guess, universe giving me some help, because I had gotten the offer. I was still negotiating it, and this happened literally between when I had my offer and my call to negotiate it. And then so obviously I didn't take it in the end. And then I was like, well, no, what am I going to do? Because I've decided I'm leaving. And I found this on LinkedIn, and
so is Lindblad your first in-house experience after making up? Okay. And you've been there, so that was October 2019. Correct. So we're about five and a half years. And what's been most surprising? What have you learned? What were some of the lessons that you picked up when you went in-house, and how has that experience differed from your outside counsel experience?
So I say this, I would say this to anybody, but it's something that really I think lawyers would appreciate more than anyone else. For those lawyers who have ever, fancied going in-house, because there aren't too many that I know who haven't thought it sounds like a good idea, because, at least big law is grueling.
Yeah.
Being in-house is no less grueling. Well, I will say that. But what was really hard for me at first is that, having only worked for a law firm, I really didn't anticipate how challenging it could be to be in a room when no one wanted you there, because I didn't I didn't anticipate that no one would want me there because they're hiring for this role. They want this help. No, they don't. They don't necessarily actually want the help. And so that is not how it is in
Yeah.
law firms.
Yeah.
You're in a law firm, you're all
Yeah.
doing the same job, sort of, right? Like
Yeah.
you all
Yeah. Yeah.
respect the role of lawyer. You're all on the same team. Of course, you might have whatever, some challenges among your team or whatever. But I really was stunned
Yeah.
at how, I don't know if I would say undervalued or less appreciative as I would
Sure.
have hoped for legal guidance and opinions. And so every day I have to work hard on that. I mean,
Yeah.
now people know me, right? Now that they understand and because I have taken the time to explain the whys behind what we do and the impact of what will
Yeah.
happen if we don't, that has certainly improved. But it would be false to make
Yeah.
like people are happy to consult with me all the time.
Yeah.
They're
Well,
just not. And that
it's
was really not on my radar.
yeah. I mean, it can be a challenging. I've seen it. It can be a challenging position to be in because things bubble up to legal when before decisions need to get made. I mean, important considerations are, have to be taken into account, and it can be hard to know. You really got to know the business, and if you have your business counterparts coming to you, and if you aren't informed on the business, but you've got to sign off on a decision or at least put in your 2 cents. There can be some real pushback, and people thinking that you're just being a roadblock or you don't get it. And so yeah, it can certainly be a challenging position. How have you feel like, I mean, you talked about developing relationships with your business counterparts, explaining the why. What have been some successful strategies you've used to overcome, that challenge?
Well, it kind of depends on timing. So where there's timing, when you have time, it's so much easier, right? Because I will be able to go through something with them, go back to the lawyers. Part of what I have found very successful is there's, I don't know if this is everywhere because this is the only company I've been in-house, but my experience has been that when I say, we need to ask for this, or here are my comments, and they want to handle it themselves. Coming from a law firm, I did all the negotiations, so that was an adjustment too. Like, let me talk to them.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
separate. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
And they would say, well, they're saying no, they're saying no, they're saying no. And every time I would say, this is totally unreasonable. Aside from unreasonable, it's not market. This is not going to be enforceable, all the things. And again, I don't know if this is generic for business people, but what I find is I get pulled in at the last minute for things that I commented on months ago. And yet all of a sudden they're like, we need this today. I'm like, where have you been the last 3 months, not responding to anything that I gave you? But okay.
yeah, yeah,
And I have said to them, put me in touch with their lawyers. I promise you, this will be
yeah,
resolved
yeah,
in less than 5 minutes, but you
yeah,
have to do that proactively and you have to do it sooner.
yeah,
I
yeah,
have yet to have a situation where I have been put in touch with the other lawyers where it hasn't been resolved very quickly. And
yeah,
and that's something that I continue to try to work on, which is that if you start feeling a delay, make me the bad guy, whatever, I don't care,
sure,
but put me in touch because I can promise you it will expedite things. For example, you two, whoever you two are with whatever business issue is, should not be negotiating data privacy.
yeah, yeah.
And it happens all the time.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Well, it's been really great to hear your perspective on the COVID pandemic and how that influenced your industry. Things that you've learned from that. In leaving, do you have advice to give to a rising attorney that would aspire to be in your shoes one day?
I would say that if you have the interest, continue to focus on the things that differentiate you from everybody else. So if you have opportunities to work on different types of representations, For
Yeah.
example, if you are a restructuring lawyer and you are only doing debtor work, seek out the opportunities to do the secureds, the unsecureds, because once you have the ability to see things from the other side, it will only make you a better lawyer in general because you can anticipate and understand what people are saying. The other thing I would say is that when you're putting your resume together, focus on the business aspects of things that you learned and be able to communicate them outwards, because it's not intuitive to recruiters. And you have learned so much more than you realize. And the
Yeah.
value that you intuitively believe that you have is there. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of figuring out how to communicate that and articulate it outwardly for people to see.
Well, thank you very much. It's been fantastic. I wish you all the best, and hopefully you'll come back soon.
Thanks. I'd be happy to.